Okay, so good day, and thank you all for being here with us today as we kick off day two of the IPMI Mobility Innovation Summit. Day one was an incredible day, great numbers, great attendance, and everything went pretty seamlessly. So we're hoping day two can even top that. Um, just so that you know, you can post questions as you go in the chat box, and we'll try to get to all of them as we go. My name is Nigel Bullis, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer here of Easy Park. We're really happy to sponsor this education session today, just to make sure you're in the right place. It's titled APDS, Outlook, an Application for Our Industry. We are super thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to sponsor this for two really important reasons. The first one is to really support IPMI. This organization is absolutely amazing, and our relation goes back over 10 years with IPMI, and before that. The IPMI does such an incredible job of supporting all of those working in the industry, and specifically with education. And I wanted to point out that the organization has done such an incredible job in one of the biggest disasters we've seen in the world, getting us through COVID. And the seamless way that they have delivered service and training has really been second to none. The second reason I'm really happy to do this is because of T2. Our business relationship with T2 Digital goes back almost 10 years. And obviously, we're really happy. We carry a suite of their products. We're happy with all it works. But I really wanted to say one of the things we're most thrilled with is that the service we receive from T2 is always been phenomenal. And in our company, we look at T2 and say, you know, for us, they're kind of the Disney of the parking industry. They're just that good at service. So I was very pleased to have this opportunity to sort of introduce them. And I want to introduce two speakers, Michael Giroux, CAP, and Chris Perry. Specifically, Mike Giroux leads the sales team at T2. He is also the co-chair of the IPMI Technology Committee and has been involved in developing a global data specification that is soon to be accepted by SIO. Very exciting stuff. He has over 15 years of experience leading the development of mobility services, remote management operations, mobile payments, and interactive marketing services. He has worked with municipalities, universities, airports, and urban garages. So a really broad experience across the globe in terms of all parking. Chris Perry is a principal at ParkTrans Solutions. Chris works with innovative technology businesses to introduce their solutions into North America and works with customers to integrate the technology into their operations. Chris has been spending more time on several smart city initiatives where data integrations are critical. Mike and Chris, the audience is all yours.
Thank you very much, Nigel. And wow, what an introduction. We'll make sure that those discounts on those pay stations is coming through immediately. But no, thank you. Chris and I are excited to talk about this. And this is more about data and how it's impacting our world, our operations, and how each of us can engage in that and participate in that. So we'll go ahead and get started. And as Nigel already mentioned, if you have questions, please put them into the chat room, or if you're bold enough or feel comfortable enough, feel free to stop us. We would love and entertain a discussion as we're going through the document. As you've already heard, Chris and I will be kind of your guides today as we go through these topics. The goal through this next 60 minutes is to talk about the importance of interconnections and the value of sharing data. I think some of us already realize it, but we wanted maybe to broaden your view of some of the other things that are happening around the globe today related to the sharing data. We're going to talk about the collaboration within and outside of the parking industry. We're then going to talk about ways to share your data more effectively, and then even go into some typical projects that are underway across the world today. So the interconnections are everywhere. At the top shows where our consumers are. You know, they're carrying their phones, they're sitting at their desks at a computer or on their tablet, or they're in their car getting information. And then down at the bottom are the places that most of us care about. You know, it's our parking facilities, it's the valet, it's the on-street parking. And the challenge for us all is, you know, there's this internet in the middle, the web. how do we connect all the different places to all of the different ways consumers go? And it would be nice if it was just one way, but there's multiple ways. There's different marketplaces out there, Ticketmaster, other places like that, Spot Hero, Arrive, lots of great sources to share information. You have the automotive manufacturers who are rolling out their own platforms that allow you through your vehicle to make purchases and to get information. There's mobile payment services, the Park Mobiles, Pay by Phones, Google Pay, Apple Pay. There's many options like that. You have the marketing and ticketing platforms. Owners and operators have their own solutions to connect to. And then obviously there are data aggregators. There are all of these places where this information can flow to. And that's the complexity of what we're dealing with. How do you get information to all the different places so that in the end, the information that you want to present gets to the user in an effective way? We also have the explosion of going on with mobility, with delivery services, and with EV charging units. And how do you then connect that information into the parking world? And then sharing that information across. So it turns into, if I can use the term, spaghetti. The information is flowing all over the place. And that really gets to what our challenge is. How do you share data that's a necessity in that connected world? Recognizing that entities are using different terms and formats to store and send the data. And how often when you go to one website, you look at some information, it's presented one way. You go to a different website and the information looks slightly different. Why is that? And it's not very effective. And as a result of the two items on the left, I'm sure anyone who's involved in technology or operations recognizes the additional expenses and effort required just to collect the data and to share it with different partners that you may have. And that really gets to the goal of what we're going to eventually talk about, which is the APDS standard. It's that those specifications make it easier to create, share, and integrate your data through that spaghetti diagram that we saw previously. So what makes it so hard to share data? Well, a lot of us use different definitions to describe our data. To give you an example, what's an early bird special? When I was in operations, I know I could go to one garage and an early bird special meant, oh, you had to be in by 7 and out by 3. But you could go to the other side of the town and early bird specials there are in by 9, out by 2. So you really can't even just say early bird special has a common definition. We have to have a way to describe what does that mean. You can even go into something that may be considered a more common term. You know, everyone knows what a validation is, right? Well, is that validation 100% off the parking fee? Or is it just a percentage off the parking fee? So again, you can see how even common terms have different meanings. When I first started in parking, I remember on the East and West Coast using the term validation to mean two different things and accounting for them in different ways that created reporting issues in financial statements. One group thought a validation was a coupon and the other group said, no, that's a coupon. We call what you call a coupon a validation. So again, this just goes to the different definitions. And as you get into more and more data, and the parking industry interacts with many other industries, the automotive, the ticketing, the events, they all have their own terminology. So having a very good definition is critical. So that's one of the reasons it's so hard to share data. The second reason is there's a different way to present and to associate that data to other data elements. So when someone says, hey, be there at 1 p.m., right? Before there was Zoom and we all lived and worked in the same office, that was easy, right? We all knew at 1 p.m. that was the local time. But how many of us have learned through over the last 18 months, well, I need to make sure I know what time zone we're talking about, because 1 p.m. on the East Coast is not 1 p.m. on the West Coast, right? We'll show up at different times. So as we share data, being able to articulate and present that information in the proper way is critical. We all know how complex rate tables can be. That's another example of a very common data that's very complicated to share. And everyone has different ways of presenting rate tables. So that's a challenge. Operating restrictions. How do you tell someone that there's no parking from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock? How about snow restrictions? What about a weight limit or a height limit? There are other very critical operating restrictions that need to be shared to allow people to decide, is the facility the right facility to park at or not? And then finally, and this is one that the more the technical folks will appreciate, it's what type of data are you sharing? When two computers are talking to each other, they need to understand what type of data are they exchanging so that they know how to store it and process it. As we talk about data standards and sharing data, that's a very important element to include in that exchange of information. And then finally, the one that's probably most recognizable by everyone on this call is entities use different APIs. And then if you don't know what an API is, it is a way that two computer systems talk and share information. My company at T2, we actually have lots of APIs going to different groups. And then there are other companies that we partner with, they have different APIs. Every time we try to collaborate for a customer, there's always a negotiation about which APIs we're going to use, how are you going to implement them. Go back to that spaghetti diagram that we showed a slide ago. Think of all of the negotiations and interactions that need to occur to make sure that people are agreeing on how the APIs are supported and how they're going to work. And heaven forbid that there's a change in someone's API that causes something to break. And I'm sure we've all have experienced that when a change is made and the information stops flowing. How do you fix it? Whose fault is it? How does that get worked through? So that just gets to the point that APIs take a lot of resources to support and maintain. And the more different APIs that are out there, the more expenses that are being spent on maintaining rather than innovating. So let's talk a little bit more about where is data used. Each of these circles represents an area that a parking operation is engaged in. You may not even realize your data is being used in these different areas. So obviously, in the parking management world, it's our revenue control systems, it's our payment systems. We're familiar with that. But are you aware that there are many automation systems that are accessing that data? Your RFID information, your access control gates, your cameras trying to monitor and understand what's going on. The mobility and public transportation groups, and especially municipalities and universities, are accessing that data. They're trying to do information to understand for city planning or campus planning what they can do and how to be more efficient. Traffic management, especially in major cities, are very interested in parking data. And you'll see if you go into some of their developments, especially in the intelligent transportation systems world, they already are developing or have developed parking data, and they're using that data in their information and their planning. There's broadcast traffic and travel information. I mean, we're seeing it through Waze and some of the stuff that Spot Hero Arrive and other entities are doing, where they're now communicating not only how long is it going to take, but are there spaces available? This is all going into traffic management. And that brings us to the left-hand side, curbside management. And yes, this is the European spelling of it, but it's just to show the global view of curbside activities. It's not only are we managing parking on street, but we're managing delivery trucks and service vehicles and Ubers and mobility services, all trying to use that same service. And all of these different groups are trying to manage and communicate and share information using data. And that's the genesis of APDS. APDS is kind of the first data specification that comes from the parking world and has parking context to it. It wasn't other people trying to guess at how parking works. It is parking. And as we talked about, it is within months of becoming a ISO recognized specification that's being used globally. And through those efforts at APDS, we're already interacting with other groups that are building data specifications. In Europe, where they have specific specifications for traffic management, they are relying on APDS terminology and data constructs to support what they're doing. We've been working with the automotive manufacturers for their automated valet parking systems. They are incorporating the APDS terminology and data constructs in their work. So as they're designing, Honda and Toyota are building their cars, they are building it knowing that the APDS is how data is going to be shared. And there's many other services as well that are connecting to it. The key about data standards is there is never going to be a single data standard to support everything in the world and every potential use case. The key, though, is to understand which standard has the strongest context to it and makes the most sense to use, and then make sure that there is collaboration with the other data standards out there, so that if someone builds their parking garages and uses an APDS data standard, that when the automotive manufacturers know that they should rely on an APDS, they're building their language leveraging that. But they also may be leveraging DataX2 again, which is DataX2 is the intelligent transportation system data specifications used in Europe. They've actually just are in the process of updating their entire parking structure to leverage the APDS. So that's example of the value of the data standard and making sure that there is collaboration with other data standards out there. So there's a lot of excitement and activity, a lot going inside our industry as well as outside of our industry. But what's the most important connection to focus on? Well, you know, we've already talked about all of these different places that consumers can go to and where our information is stored. We talked about EV chargers and all those ancillary services that can be deployed through various things. But the most important connection is our parking facility. And that's the source of all this information. Everything starts there. And if we can define our data using a standard way, then all of these other entities can start to rely on that. And that data can flow through within our industry, through the various service providers, as well as to other industries, automotive manufacturers, event entities, intelligent transportation systems. We can now create a better, more supported data flow that helps other people achieve their objective as well. So focusing on it all starts at our own homes, if you will, in our own operations. We're the starting point to making this all successful. So that gets us to the APDS data specification. What exactly is it? The intention of it is to enable entities to spend more of their resources on innovating with their data versus clarifying how to integrate their data. We want to make it easy for two technology companies not to have to negotiate which of their APIs are they going to use, but to say, okay, we're going to use the APDS standard. Everyone knows how that works. We know how to share data in that way. That doesn't mean that every system does the same thing and then all the systems are equal. There are many great technologies out there and they each do different things and have different value points. But when they share information, they'll be able to share information in a common format, making it easier for operators, owners, and consumers to take advantage of that data. So how does APDS do that? Well, it's defining common definitions for industry data and concepts, establishing acceptable formats for sharing relevant data. That's a fancy word for saying we're proposing standard APIs that people can leverage to build upon and immediately use. We're concerned with the definition of data. Again, we want to make sure that there's a common definition. We aren't concerned with how you use that data in your system, and we're not concerned with what are the best operating practices. That's up to each operation. That's up to each technology provider on how they use data to generate value. But when we are concerned with the sharing of data. And the most important thing to remember is that as you go down this path, not everyone needs to do everything immediately. Not everyone needs to have all of the data. It's the specification has to fit the simple and the complex activities equally. So you need to be able to grow or shrink as necessary to meet the needs of the specific solution desired. So when the APDS specification was built, that was all built into it. And it's been very useful to us especially as we work with other entities and industries to collaborate. So this is a high-level view of the different data domains currently covered in the APDS specification. There's a lot here, but just focusing on the green boxes, we can describe a place. Where is your operation? What are the operating hours of your operation? Who are the contacts for your operation? What are payment methods and operating restrictions? We talk about rights, and this is a very important data domain, and it's one of the only ones that kind of can view this. We thought it was important to talk about what are the permissions being granted, separate from what are the rates being charged for those permissions. So within the rights data, we get into what is the permission being granted. When someone pulls a ticket from a ticket spitter, they're being given a right to pull into the parking garage and park. When someone pulls into a on-street parking space and they make a payment through their mobile app, they're being granted the right to park there for a certain amount of time, etc. So that defines the rights. Rates obviously goes into how do you charge for their various services and permissions. Quote data. How do two systems talk that aren't ready to complete a transaction but need some general information? How do you control that? That's through quotes. Occupancy and utilization data. How do we know what spaces are available? How do we know what spaces are in use, or what is the activity? That data is defined. Observation data. We collect tremendous amounts of data in our parking and transportation world, whether it's LPR reads, whether it's RFID reads, whether it's manual observations, your attendant walking through the garage on a nightly basis making accounts, all very valuable information. And then finally, we have session data. When an activity starts and when an activity ends, we collect up and are able to share that data with various groups so that you can do financial transactions, you can manage your enforcement opportunities. So what does the APDS standard actually look like? For the technically interested folks, it's a model-driven approach. On the left is an example of just one area. We describe how data should be associated through UML models. The standard also includes JSON API supportable messaging, and we're going to talk about where you can go to find those samples. And the other benefit is we already exist with many existing ISO standards and other national standards that are being developed. That's been one of the focuses, is to make sure that there is collaboration with other standards out there. What does the API messaging look like? Here, again, for the technically interested folks, here's an example of some of the API messaging that already exists. And this one is for issuing quotes. So if someone requests a quote for a price, we have a starting point of how that quote would work using the APDS standard. But probably many of us aren't interested or don't fully understand the technical. We want to understand a little bit more about what does it mean for me on a day in and day out basis. So over the next couple slides, we're going to kind of go through the various critical data sharing activities that are supported. The first one, and the most critical, is the placement of locations. The APDS standard supports both on and off-street parking. It also supports non-parking activities, such as loading zones or scooter corrals. Where are those located? All of that can be defined. It identifies areas and usage of those areas. So is this a parking area? Is it a transportation area? Is it a no-use area? Does that area change during the day? Is it a no parking zone in the morning, and then at lunchtime it's a delivery zone, and then at the evening it's a parking zone? It's a basis for the rest of the standard. And you can see this use when you go to mapping sites. It has the ability to support various mapping sites as well. The data also allows us to get to within a facility to be able to describe different levels of a parking facility or even specific spaces. So if you have a certain area that's full of reserved parkers, or you have a specific space that's dedicated to a specific use or owner of a right, We have the ability to control it to that level of detail. And again, that goes back to the premise of the APDS standard to be as simple as it needs to be, or to provide the level of detail and complexity that an entity may need to support. The next use of the APDS standard is the placement of equipment and services. How do I identify and locate equipment and service options within a place? So think about a truck stop. It's a form of parking, and a truck driver going down the interstate or the highway is trying to figure out where they can park, and they probably need to do different services. Maybe they need maintenance, maybe they like to get some food, maybe they need to use a shower and restroom, maybe they need other services. The APDS specification allows those sort of services as well as equipment to be identified and placed within that location. So you can identify this location has EV chargers, this location has ATM machines, this location has showers, this location has maintenance services for a truck, car wash services, etc. All of that can be documented and shared for those entities that want to share that information. And again, it's both equipment or services. We've talked about this a little bit in the beginning when I was going through the rights domain, and this is a very critical or important benefit of the APDS specification. It's the idea of defining what is the permission being granted. Is there a permission to park? Is there a permission to do a delivery or some sort of service, i.e. maybe store my scooters at a certain location? Or is this mobility related? This is where I can pick up a ride share. This is where I can pick up the bus. Or a drop-off zone. Each of those is a different type of permission, and we have the ability to describe where that permission is being granted, at what location, at what time, and for at what price does that permission cost. And so it allows you to track that and then issue those to various groups. Communicating rates between systems and platforms. Through the pandemic, we saw the growth of mobile activity and the multiple providers providing similar services. How does an operator ensure that their rates are the same across all of those different platforms? How do they make sure that when they make a price change, that price change is propagated quickly throughout the industry and all the various things? Imagine making a price change, but Toyota not hearing about it for 2 months and it's not updated on their platform. That would obviously be a problem for the operator, as they're going to have an upset customer. So this service and the APDS technology or specification describes a common way to share rate information, allowing you to schedule and have pre-defined rate tables and the date that they become effective, so that you can start to share that information, make sure it gets out into the community, and people know well in advance of when they should be turning on new rate schedules. The rate tables also allow you to define eligibility requirements. So if I have special rates for a residence in a building or tenants in a building, or in some cases, some entities say, if you park in the morning, you're allowed to park again in the community in the afternoon at a reduced rate. All of that eligibility requirements are defined and can be shared through the APDS specification. So generating and issuing quotes, again, in a world of dynamic pricing and multiple ways for the consumer to get purchase parking and other services, the need to generate quotes is critical. Imagine going to Amazon and having to decide that you want to buy something, but not being able to see the price and your various options ahead of time. A lot of times that's what's happening in the parking world. You have to get in the lane and make your purchase before you decide. Or you have to almost go down to the final steps of making that purchase, and you can't really see what your various options are. And that's what this first diagram is showing. In the beginning, the entity that controls the rates, the parking garage in this case, controls rates and eligibility. And before there were computers and cell phones, it was pretty easy. Someone would come to the office and say, I'd like to buy a monthly permit. Okay, here's the price. Do you like it or not? If I don't like it, I go next door, and off they would go. But then we started doing more and more mobile pay several years ago. initially, this was all verbal information sharing. I had a rate table set up at the facility. I had to have a rate table then set up at my local service provider. But wouldn't it be nice if that facility still controlled all the rates, and then you wouldn't have, excuse me, have the issues of different rates in different places, or different people incorrectly charging different rates, and then you still having to accept it. The idea of the quotes is that a central system can control all the rates, make sure the right rates are being used, make sure the right eligibility rules are being applied, and then entities are calling in and saying, I have a customer that would like to buy for 3 hours, here's the quote. The parking facility would then issue a quote, and if the person buys it, that's great. It also allows then the place to now to see what is happening across all the different channels on which they're selling, and managing that occupancy and understanding what the sales are, and better managing their pricing. So the APDS specification will enable entities to better manage their rates, their quotes, and their utilization across multiple places. Sharing occupancy and availability. We're seeing more and more signs. I know I expect to have an idea of how crowded a place is going to be when I'm looking to go somewhere. It's tough to share that information today. The specification provides a more common way of sharing that, by identifying the supply of spaces and communicating the use of spaces, and recognizing that demand is calculated in different ways. Some facilities still rely on a daily manual walk of the lot and to enter in a number. The data is only updated once a day. Other places have space sensors over each space that's checking that space multiple times a second. The data specification allows you to communicate when was the last time this data was updated, so that people are receiving the data know, is it very fresh data or is it 24 hours old? How many of us have done utilization studies and have relied on data to be collected? Wouldn't it be nice to share that data with other people, and then to have a standard format, so that when you do your comparison 2 years from now or 6 months from now, you could do a comparison because the data is in a standard format. The specification will allow the data to be tracked and shared in that way. And finally, the APDS standard talks about and supports all of the new activities that are growing. Curbside management, so communicating rules and permissions, identified authorized users of those different areas, and how to do pricing and tariffs. And then more importantly, enabling the common enforcement. So those are 6 different areas of where APDS currently is providing support and is being used by various groups throughout the world today. So now what we want to do, let me stop there. Are there any questions or comments that anyone wants to have?
Mike, so far I'm not seeing any specific questions.
Okay. Again, please feel free to ask questions on what's happening and where we're going. What we're going to go into next are some current applications that are happening around the world. And the first one is coming out of the UK. The UK government has funded the development. They're calling it they're citywide parking platforms. And they are now pushing these out or they're growing to other cities. The initial one was in Manchester. And the platform basically collects up parking data and the parking availability and parking pricing from the various private and public entities. It goes into their platform, and then on the right-hand side are all the various user interfaces where people can find and select parking. The city is building the platform, and that's theirs. And as I said, the UK government is taking this platform and it intends to take it to other cities. The APDS interface, though, is core to it. And then you can see the 2 vertical gray lines. Data coming from all of the private and public parking facilities are all being transferred using the APDS data standard. It comes into their platform, and then when the data output, the customers try to buy or look for parking, they're going through various services, Just Park, Parkopedia, various parking operator websites, and I believe the city is even considering developing their own website to promote parking. That information is shared with those entities using the APDS standard as well. So placement, place and location information, rate information, right information, and eventually quotes are all going to be used and shared using the APDS standards. There are many opportunities in North America as well where this is going on. I think most cities are trying to understand how to understand what are the parking options in their areas. Most cities are using mobile payment solutions today to manage their own facilities and services. But expanding that and providing more options to other folks is a benefit and a desire, especially as we try to figure out how to better use our transportation assets. I think universities have done a tremendous job of creating these platforms. I mean, they have the benefit of controlling all of their transportation and platforms. But I think some of them, while they have their own university apps, many of them are also engaging with the local community about other services that are being used and access, whether it's a Park Mobile or a pay by phone, supporting a university, in addition to the university's websites and tools that they use to share parking and mobility. So I have a question here. Do you have any insight? The question is, do you have any insight on what software platform Manchester is using to ingest this data? Yeah, so it's all based on the APDS standard. But they have created their own database and data structure that was funded by the UK government. So it's a self-built tool, but again based on the APDS data specification. So that's how they're communicating, ingesting, and exporting the data. Does that answer the question? Thank you. Okay. What's interesting is this is up and running today and is actually being presented and reviewed. I've been on a couple conversations with cities in Australia, New Zealand, and other cities throughout Europe that are leveraging these concepts to build it. And there's many, again, as I said, there's things going on in North America as well that under similar platforms. The desire to have access to this information for transactions, for planning purposes is pretty significant, which makes it interesting of where Manchester is planning to go. And this is kind of their vision as they continue to develop their platform and what they intend to do. So it's starting with parking, but they are turning it into a curbside platform as well. They want to be able to make sure their Ubers and other rideshare services know where to park, and then the people know where to go to pick up rides. What are they doing with other mobility services, whether it's scooters, bikes, etc. They're connecting in residential permit management programs into this platform, on-street payment. They're connecting it with their transportation services, such as their rail and other services. And they're bringing in all of this data into their common platform so that they can make sure that whoever wants access to that data, whether it's the automotive manufacturers, whether it's map providers, whether it's various mobile payment tools, whether it's enforcement systems, they all can have a common place to get the data and a common method to access the data. And as you see, one of the things that the UK is looking to do is take each city then and put it into a national transport data platform. So again, a very ambitious project, but you can see where the UK government is intending to go and how they're developing it within each city. And I would think that most universities, most municipalities in North America would have similar objectives and goals to accomplish to help streamline their parking and transportation resources and making sure that the communities are getting the best optimization of access to those. I'm going to pass it over to Chris now, who's going to talk about a project that he's been working on that's related to data as well.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike said, we're going to spend a couple minutes on this project, but then also start to talk about how we get started with the APDS and what we do moving forward. So this is a project I was recently involved with, and two things are interesting about it. One is the company Umojo kind of grew up in parking doing AI, and has recently got into some curbside management. Quickly moved them from an application that was more parking specific into a smart city type of project. So the goal of the project was to reduce the pedestrian vehicle accidents and move closer to that Vision Zero initiative. So there were various data inputs from different parts of the mobility spectrum. And the idea was to bring them together and see if the city and the group couldn't identify the reasons behind the accidents. There were 13 accidents logged last year, but the theory was there's probably a larger subset misses that if we can identify the near misses, we can help mitigate some of the issues going on with the pedestrian vehicle accidents. All of the data was provided by the University of Florida, their Transportation Institute. They have something pretty neat called the iStreet platform, and various mobility smart city endpoints are there. So ideas like this can be tested. The other interesting part about this was how quickly the data and the standards became part of the project. So not only was it about the pedestrian safety, but very quickly the topic of data sovereignty, the data standards, and participating vendors to work with other data standards out there, such as the Open Mobility Foundation. So now we'll talk about how we get started.
Well, hold on. There's a question in here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So would you say that build your own data hub is the most prevalent platform choice, or are there any off-the-shelf products? That's a great question. I would say there are many entities that are working on building off-the-shelf products. I think one of the key things that you need to consider when looking at those off-the-shelf products is that, are they following an open data specification, such as APDS? And how are they controlling and owning that data? I think it's critical that every entity needs to own their data. That is a critical way that allows you then to share it with other parties as you need to share it. In regards, though, we're seeing, I would say it's probably about 50-50 of people using off-the-shelf products and trying to build it, versus I think a lot of municipalities are building their own data platforms, as well as many universities as well. It'll be interesting to see over the coming months, are there more, I don't want to quite say open source platforms to leverage, but we are seeing a lot of progress with the UK's platforms being, I looked at and evaluated for use in other places. And I think the key one, though, aspect in all of this is, how are you sharing information in and out, which is, again, becomes back to the value of the APDS specification. That makes it easy for people to know how to share their data and then how to receive the data that may be coming out of the platform. I hope, Nina, that answers the question. Is there any more follow-up that we can have? Okay, thank you. Are there any other projects that people know that are underway before we kind of go into the next steps of APDS that they'd like to talk about or share or discuss? Are there anyone on the call that's in the process of trying to build a platform or some version of a platform that'd be interested in sharing some of the challenges you're seeing? Are you seeing challenges with the data integrations, with the data definitions, et cetera? All right. Very talkative group today, but we will go on then. So, so how do you get started? And I know Chris is going to spend some time kind of talking through We're in the process of forming user groups, and Chris is leading that effort. So if you have an interested in getting involved, I encourage you to reach out to Chris after this. But back to you, Chris.
Yep. No, thank you. So how do we get started? I think this is an important topic, and the user groups are going to focus on that. How do we get started and what do we do? But to start off, I think an important thing to talk about is that this is not an immediate change from one to the other. It's a migration. We do not think that any system needs to be rewritten. So the underlying vendor data and IT and infrastructure can communicate those data one to the other. So what will be required to get started? You'll work with your technology partners, your internal teams, to find different ways to develop your roadmap, set some expectations of the standard. And I think importantly, prioritizing areas of focus. Not everything can be moved overnight. Not everything can be adopted overnight, but putting things in order to meet your customers and your commercial expectations would be one of the first steps. Next slide, Mike. There we go. Okay. So one of the first steps will be understand your data. The APDS has data definition standards. Can you go back one, Mike?
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry.
There you go. And vendors have their own underlying data definitions. Mike talked earlier about the validations versus discounts, and that's a great example. But I think one of the good steps would be to go through the standard, understand its own definitions and meanings, and simultaneously go through your own data standards and understand their definitions and meanings, and kind of create a list of where there's overlap and where there needs to be further development. There's going to be some areas where you're already, I would say, within standard, and then probably areas where we need to do some work.
And if I can just comment, I mean, based on some of the experiences that we've already seen, you're probably going to be surprised about, even in your own world, you're already using different data definitions, and you didn't even realize it. So don't be so worried about it, and don't panic and try to fix it all at once. And the process is to identify where those differences are, and then start to work through time and over time to merge your data definitions to a common one.
I think would be to set expectations. What you'll see on this slide. Okay, there you go. What you'll see on this slide is some language that has been taken from recent municipal RFPs. So this is kind of a push-pull scenario in my mind, where the cities see the value in the standard. They know that the data sharing can be made more efficient, and can help them improve their operations. So we're going to see, and we should expect to see some language in RFPs asking participating vendors to support these standards. And similarly, there's also the opposite side where we can help drive the standards, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, and these are available, I believe, Rachel, on the website. And again, as Chris highlighted, they aren't saying that, and when you do an RFP for technology, that you have to be APDS, but you're setting the expectation that you want your vendors to start to move in that direction. And again, that goes back to the slide where what's the most important critical connection? Well, it's your parking facility, because if your data is not being shared in a standard way, it's not going to flow through that spaghetti diagram to all of the various options that we see coming. So set that expectation with your technology providers, as well as with within your own IT departments, and start the transition.
So Mike, the template RFP language is actually not included on the APDS website. One of the places we would like people to share that, because if it's not our language, You know what I mean? We wouldn't necessarily share it. We do have the forum, and I would encourage folks to share their templated RFP language on the forum. And we can look at creating, you know what I mean, some resources that are more boilerplate for folks, less thinking, more plug and play. But as we know, nothing is really boilerplate. So, you know what I mean? We want it to be customized to your organization. But that's a great idea. And I can take those and drop those on the forum later today.
No.
Thank you, Rachel.
Okay. So back to the industry-led side. As we talked before, cities may have language within RFPs requesting standards to be followed, but the standard itself is something that we can create as a community. Our priorities, we can find value in the specification. So we'll talk is representation from the parking and the mobility providers to help further define the focus, further define the standard, add input on what we're seeing as participating in these projects. The past and how maybe the APDS could have helped streamline that process.
And just to kind of follow on up on this, we've had over, correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, there's like over 300 volunteers that have had different roles in developing the specification over several different phases. And what Chris is talking about being industry-led, the goal here is to focus where are the needs. We're not trying to create books. We're trying to create value for our industry as well as for the industries that interact with us. So your participation is highly regarded, heavily desired, and greatly appreciated. So
yeah, I would, and absolutely essential, right? So this is an example where you know, all of us are smarter than one of us or individuals. In order to grow a standard that's both flexible and evolving. So you'll see different levels of commitment. You know what I mean? We have champion sponsors that have, you know what I mean, representation on the board. We have advocate sponsors. We have free supporters. So there's engagement literally at every level for every size, shape, scope of operation. So I'd encourage you to, you know, click through those links and let us know, you know, sort of how you'd like to be involved. The most important, of course, is giving feedback on the current version, which has a bit of a timeline on it, Mike. So I don't want to steal your thunder on those items.
I think
we have a July, yeah. So the recent version 3 has a July 20th version deadline for technical comment.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that at the end.
Oh,
so
apologies. See, still thunder. I'll go
now. But no, lastly, before we get into that, I think we should talk a little bit about the user groups. And as part of that industry-led effort that we touched on, the goal of the groups is to create that feedback loop so that we can continue to educate the industry, to refine the standard, to add to the standard, to drive adoption, and as we said, go through that feedback loop. So we had 2 user group meetings earlier in the month. The premise there was to kind of get everybody up to speed with education. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. We have scheduled again is the next sessions. And at that point, I would anticipate continuing with the education to kind of bridge the gap between June and September, but then also to start that initiative of feedback, trading stories, and finding a way to use the standard to help. Right. So September is those dates, correct?
Yeah, I believe those are the dates. I don't know if they've actually been scheduled yet, Rachel. No, but we're coming up on those.
Posted yet, but we will get them up in the next couple of days. Sure.
And as Chris was saying, it's that knowledge sharing which is going to make the specification and standard more useful. It's the sharing the experiences of using the APIs or the standard messaging that's being proposed. And then also hearing different stories of how the specification is being used. There's already been a significant amount of sharing, and then it's generating more and more ideas. So we would like to see more people involved in the user group to take advantage of that, to both learn and to share what you've been doing. And again, thanks to Chris for helping continue to grow and develop the various user groups that we have going today. So take a look on the website and see more information on that. So that gets us to, which Rachel was already outlining. So the next steps and resources. So we go out to the website. There's an incredible amount of information out there. The API library is out there for the very technical folks, or send your IT team to go look at it. You can get that information there. We released the version 3.0 of the standard. It is in the comment period. So feel free to read the document, provide comments, suggestions, ask for clarifications. We're accepting those comments through July 20th. At the same time, the ISO world has been reviewing the document as well. Their period just closed. We're going to be merging the two comment sets together and creating a updated version that will be released probably late this summer. My guess would be sometime in August or September. So feel free to go through the documents. Feel free to reach out to myself, to Chris, or other people listed on the website. Brent Paxton is on the board. There's several other folks that you are probably very familiar with that are on the board that can help answer questions as well. So with that, are there any final questions?
Mike, I'm not seeing anything in chat, but I want to encourage everybody, if you have additional questions, you see both Mike and Chris's contact information on the screen right now. And I know that we're right up against our time, so I would actually just like to thank Mike and Chris for a great presentation, super informative. And I hope everybody here enjoyed the presentation. And I also hope that you're all going to join us in the next session that's going to start right at the top of the hour. And it's about pushing the envelope on electric vehicles. Hope you're going to join us, and hope you spend the rest of your day with us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
everybody.
day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.